What was it like on the set of Little House on the Prairie? The actress who played Michael Landon's wife says it wasn't as wholesome as it seemed.
Guess what me and Andrew found?
Where have you been, young lady? You're late.
Huh?
I asked you where you've been.
Well, I was trying to tell you, me and Andrew.
Fact is, you're late.
For 9 seasons, Little House on the Prairie invited millions of American families into the humble world of the Ingalls clan, a story of hardship, faith, and togetherness set against the sweeping backdrop of the Minnesota plains. To an entire generation, Walnut Grove felt like a second home, a place where Pa's fiddle could soothe any storm and Ma's quiet strength held everything together. But the warm, wholesome image that played out on television screens each week didn't always match what was happening once the director yelled cut. Behind the gingham dresses and sod-covered cabins was a set full of real people carrying real burdens, grief, addiction, rivalry, secrecy, and heartbreak that never made it into the final edit. In this video, we're pulling back the curtain on the series that shaped a generation's idea of the American frontier, exploring the surprising truths, the overlooked bloopers, and the human stories that never aired. On screen, few relationships were as venomous as the one between Laura Ingalls and Nellie Oleson. Nellie was written as the spoiled, sharp-tongued foil to Laura's earnest goodness, and the two traded insults and dirty looks in nearly every episode they shared. Audiences loved to hate Nellie, and that's exactly the reaction the writers were going for. What almost nobody watching at home realized was that Melissa Gilbert, who played Laura, and Allison Arngrim, who played Nellie, were genuinely close off camera. The two young actresses bonded quickly during production, spending their free time together between takes and eventually becoming inseparable outside of work as well. It's a strange kind of talent, convincingly playing a bitter enemy on screen while being one of your best friends in real life, but both actresses managed it episode after episode for years. Their friendship extended well beyond typical co-worker courtesy. They spent weekends together, stayed over at each other's houses, and leaned on one another during the awkward, complicated years of growing up in front of a national audience. That closeness gave them a kind of shorthand on set. They knew exactly how to push each other's buttons to sell a scene, and just as easily could drop the act the second the camera stopped rolling. Young actors on a long-running series inevitably find ways to keep themselves entertained, and the Little House cast was no exception. Allison Arngrim's on-screen husband, Percival, was played by actor Steve Tracy, and the two of them struck up their own genuine friendship away from the show. As it turns out, Steve Tracy was gay, a fact that had zero bearing on how enthusiastically he and Allison played up their characters' romance for the cameras, and, mischievously, for each other's amusement behind the scenes. The pair discovered that nothing rattled Melissa Gilbert quite like an exaggerated, theatrical display of affection performed just out of the director's eyeline. Knowing that Melissa was still finding her footing with on-screen romance herself, Steve and Allison would ham up their chemistry to comedic extremes, fully aware it would fluster their friend. It wasn't malicious. It was the kind of good-natured teasing that happens on any set where people spend more waking hours with each other than with their own families. Meanwhile, Melissa's actual screen romance, opposite Dean Butler as Almanzo Wilder, played out with far more restraint and nervous energy than the make-believe love story unfolding beside her. Melissa Gilbert was only 15 years old when the show called for her first on-screen kiss, a moment that also happened to be her first kiss in real life. Her scene partner, Dean Butler, was 23 at the time, and the age difference made an already nerve-wracking milestone even more uncomfortable for the young actress. Unsure of how to voice her hesitation, Melissa turned to the person she trusted most on set, Michael Landon, who wasn't just her co-star but also a director and, in many ways, a father figure to her. Landon took her concerns seriously. Rather than dismissing a teenager's nerves as something to simply push through for the sake of the scene, he brought the issue directly to the producers. The team agreed to soften the moment, swapping the scripted kiss for a much gentler cheek peck instead. It's a small adjustment in the grand scheme of a 9-season show, but it says something about the environment Landon tried to cultivate. Even amid the pressures of network television, there was room to listen to a young performer's discomfort and actually do something about it. To viewers, Charles Ingalls was the moral backbone of Walnut Grove, a man whose faith and values anchored nearly every episode's lesson. It might come as a surprise, then, to learn that Michael Landon, the actor who brought Pa Ingalls to life, was raised with Jewish heritage. Born Eugene Maurice Orowitz in Queens, New York, Landon grew up in a household split between his father's Jewish background and his mother's Catholic faith. He was raised primarily in New Jersey, where he had his bar mitzvah, embracing his father's cultural identity even as his personal spiritual beliefs remained more private and less defined by any single religious label. There was no contradiction in Landon's mind between his own background and the deeply Christian themes his character often embodied on screen. Acting, after all, is the business of stepping into someone else's life, and Landon approached Charles Ingalls with the same sincerity he brought to every role. Off-screen, by most accounts, he considered himself a believer in a higher power without attaching himself firmly to any one denomination, carrying his father's Jewish identity as a cultural touchstone rather than a strict religious practice. Michael Landon's thick, wavy dark hair became something of a signature look, instantly recognizable to fans of the show. What many didn't realize was that his natural hair color was a far less dramatic ash brown, and the rich brunette shade audiences saw on screen came from regular dye treatments. Landon reportedly took his appearance seriously enough to have his color done by a professional stylist rather than leaving it to chance, a level of care that hints at just how image-conscious the entertainment industry was, even for a show set in a dusty 19th century farm town. The dye job wasn't foolproof, either. As Landon aged and gray hairs started creeping in, the combination of studio lighting and natural sunlight on location shoots occasionally gave his hair an unintended purplish tint. When that happened, the production had to call on additional colorists just to correct the issue before filming could continue, a strange bit of behind-the-scenes vanity management for a show so committed to portraying rustic, humble frontier life. Despite its family-friendly reputation, the atmosphere on the Little House set wasn't always as pure as the storyline suggested. Cast and crew members have spoken over the years about a fairly loose culture around alcohol during production, with drinking reportedly a common feature of long, grueling shoot days. Melissa Gilbert herself has written candidly about the drinking culture that surrounded the show, describing days so demanding that crew members joked about how many cases of beer it would take to get through them. She has also spoken about noticing, gradually, that Michael Landon's own relationship with alcohol went beyond casual social drinking. According to her recollections, he was skilled at masking just how much he was consuming throughout a typical day, and it took time before the full scope of the habit became apparent to the people working closely with him. It's a sobering reminder that even the most beloved, larger-than-life figures on a cheerful family show were dealing with very human struggles most of the audience never saw. While Little House on the Prairie is often remembered as gentle, sentimental television, it actually tackled a surprising number of heavy subjects for its era. Storylines touched on sexual assault, alcoholism, racial prejudice, disability, poverty, and adoption at a time when many other family programs steered clear of anything remotely controversial. The show's willingness to sit with uncomfortable themes, rather than resolve everything with a tidy moral in the final 5 minutes, is part of why it's remembered so fondly by television historians as a program that was quietly ahead of its time. It managed to be both comforting and challenging, offering warmth without pretending the world was simple. Jonathan Gilbert, who played the Olsen family's younger son Willie, was actually the real-life adopted brother of Melissa Gilbert, who starred as Laura. Off-screen, the two grew up together as siblings, sharing a household and a family life away from set that mirrored, in some ways, the close-knit family dynamic depicted in the show itself. Unfortunately, their relationship didn't stay close forever. The two eventually drifted apart, and by most accounts, they're no longer in close contact. Jonathan ultimately left acting behind entirely, pursuing a career in finance and building a life as a stockbroker in New York. Melissa, meanwhile, remained deeply embedded in the entertainment industry. She went on to serve as president of the Screen Actors Guild in the early 2000s later stepping into the political arena with the 2016 congressional campaign in Michigan. Health complications tied to an earlier accident ultimately forced her to withdraw from that race. But the run itself reflected a lifelong pattern of stepping into new arenas well beyond the world of acting. On screen, Mary and Laura Ingalls shared the kind of loving, occasionally squabbling sisterhood that felt entirely believable to viewers. Off-screen, the relationship between Melissa Gilbert and Melissa Sue Anderson, who played Mary, was considerably chillier. The two actresses reportedly never warmed to each other throughout the show's entire run, and their tension became well known enough around the set that other cast and crew members generally kept their distance from the friction between them. Melissa Gilbert has spoken about the falling out in her memoir, describing her former co-star as distant and difficult to connect with. Melissa Sue Anderson, for her part, has rarely addressed the rift publicly, leaving audiences with only one side of the story. Some have speculated that a particularly sheltered and closely managed upbringing may have left Anderson less inclined toward the kind of easy camaraderie other cast members shared, though without her own account, the true nature of the falling out remains something of a mystery nearly half a century later. It's easy to assume a setting as idyllic as Walnut Grove exists only in the imagination of a novelist, but the town is very real. Laura Ingalls Wilder, whose semi-autobiographical novels formed the basis for the television series, genuinely spent part of her childhood there. The real Walnut Grove sits in Redwood County, Minnesota, officially founded in the 1870s. It remains a small community today, with a population numbering only in the low thousands and a footprint of barely a single square mile. For fans who make the pilgrimage, the town has leaned into its literary fame, hosting museums and historical markers dedicated to the Ingalls family's time there, even though much of Wilder's broader life story took her to other frontier towns across several states. The television series didn't spring from nowhere. Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote her novels drawing directly from her own childhood experiences homesteading across the American Midwest during the late 1800s, a period defined by families uprooting their lives and settling largely unclaimed land in hopes of building something of their own. The federal government actively encouraged this kind of westward settlement, often romanticizing homestead life as a path to independence and prosperity, even though the reality for families like the Ingalls was defined far more by hardship, isolation, and constant uncertainty than by picturesque simplicity. Wilder's books found enormous success with readers, enough so that producer Ed Friendly took notice and acquired the rights to adapt them for television. The resulting series premiered in the mid-1970s and ran for 8 full